You can't be serious. The words, sharp and brittle as spun glass, cracked the genteel hum of the cafe. Victoria Ashford pushed her porcelain coffee cup with such force that a dark, viscous wave of espresso slopped over the rim, staining the pristine white marble of the table. The disabled waitress is making strange gestures at my daughter, as if she's some kind of circus act. Bella Vista, a sun-drenched sanctuary nestled in the granite and glass heart of Manhattan's financial district, was the exclusive daytime haunt of the city's elite. It was a place of hushed deals and quiet power, where the clinking of spoons against china was the loudest sound one usually heard. But on this Tuesday afternoon, the tension in the air was a palpable, living thing. Every eye in the room, from the hedge fund managers in their bespoke suits to the society wives in their Chanel tweeds, turned to the central table. A silent, collective intake of breath. Kesha Johnson, a 26-year-old black woman, stood motionless, her hands still poised in the air, the echo of a silent conversation lingering in the space between her and the small, blonde girl seated at the table. She had just been communicating with 8-year-old Emma Ashford in American Sign Language, a fluid, graceful ballet of the hands. And Emma, a child who had not spoken a single, audible word since witnessing a traumatic accident 2 years prior, had just, for the first time in months, smiled, a genuine, radiant, soul-deep smile. "Ma'am, Kesha began, her voice soft, but Victoria cut her off, the words a low, vicious growl. "I don't care about your excuses," she snarled, rising from her chair with a sudden, violent grace. "Where is the manager? I want this person removed from my sight immediately. How dare you hire someone like this to serve decent people?" Thomas Ashford, a man whose face was a familiar fixture on the covers of business magazines, sighed, a heavy, weary sound of resignation. The 43-year-old CEO of one of the country's largest investment firms watched the scene unfold with a familiar, sickening mixture of embarrassment and helplessness. His daughter, his beautiful, broken daughter, who had existed in a world of profound, unbreachable silence for 2 long years, was now looking up at Kesha with wide, shining eyes, her small hands timidly attempting to imitate the sign for friend that Kesha had just taught her. "Victoria, perhaps we should," Thomas began, his voice a low, placating murmur, but he knew it was hopeless. His wife's temper, when ignited, was a force of nature, a hurricane of indignation that leveled everything in its path. "Don't you dare take that condescending tone with me, Thomas," she spat, turning on him with eyes that blazed with a cold white-hot fury. "Our daughter requires proper, professional therapy. Not this. Not some pathetic, clownish pantomime with a waitress who can't even be bothered to speak properly." Kesha stood her ground, her expression a mask of calm, professional neutrality. But her fingers, hidden from view, discreetly clenched the small, sleek digital recorder tucked into the pocket of her apron. In her 5 years working at this establishment, she had witnessed and documented countless similar moments of casual, unthinking cruelty. What these people, in their hermetically sealed world of privilege and power, could not possibly know was that behind the simple, unassuming facade of the deaf waitress was a brilliant, strategic mind, and a plan, years in the making, that was slowly, meticulously, and inexorably clicking into place. And then, a sound, small and fragile as a bird's wing, fell into the supercharged silence of the cafe. "Mum, yes. Nice." It was Emma. Her voice, hoarse and rusty from 2 years of disuse, was barely a whisper, but it carried the force of a sonic boom. The entire cafe seemed to freeze. Thomas dropped the linen napkin he had been nervously twisting in his hands. Victoria's face, which had been a mask of rage, went slack with a stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. But Kesha simply smiled, a slow, knowing and profoundly calm smile. It was as if she had just witnessed the opening move of a complex chess game, a game for which she had already planned out the next 20 moves. Her eyes met Emma's, and in that fleeting, silent glance, a universe of understanding passed between them. And in that moment, as she watched the raw, undisguised despair warring with the anger on Victoria Ashford's face, Kesha knew she had just found the final, crucial piece of the puzzle she had been so patiently, so painstakingly assembling for years. The game had begun. The stunned silence that had followed Emma's first spoken words in 2 years was a fragile, crystalline thing, and Victoria Ashford shattered it with a fresh explosion of rage. "This is unacceptable," she shrieked, her voice a high, piercing sound that made several of the patrons flinch. She slammed her palm down on the marble table, the porcelain cups and saucers chattering in protest. This person is manipulating my daughter, using cheap theatrical tricks to get a reaction from her. She turned her furious gaze on her husband. Thomas, are you just going to sit there and allow our daughter to be influenced by someone like that? The other patrons of Café Bella Vista, the masters of the universe and their elegant consorts, were now openly staring, their polite facades momentarily forgotten in the face of such a raw, unseemly display of public emotion. Some whispered behind their hands. Others, more brazen, discreetly filmed the unfolding drama with their smartphones. Kesha remained a statue of calm in the eye of the storm. Her gaze shifted from the furious, gesticulating mother to the terrified, silent child, who had once again retreated into herself, hiding behind her father's chair. In her 5 years at the cafe, Kesha had become an expert in the subtle, coded language of the rich. She had witnessed countless displays of arrogance, of entitlement, of a casual, almost bored prejudice, but she had never seen anything as raw, as venomous as this. Mrs. Ashford, Michael, the cafe's young, perpetually flustered manager, approached the table, his steps cautious, as if he were approaching a caged and unpredictable animal. Perhaps we could resolve this more discreetly. Discreetly. Victoria turned on him, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. You want me to be discreet when one of your disabled employees is conducting some sort of bizarre, unsanctioned experiment on my daughter, or is the owner of this establishment? I want this person fired. Immediately. Thomas, his face a mask of deep, profound embarrassment, finally found his voice. As the CEO of a company that prided itself on its public commitment to diversity and inclusion, he was acutely, painfully aware of the potential damage this scene could do to his carefully curated reputation if it were to leak to the media. He was also, as always, cowed by his wife's explosive, unpredictable temper. My wife is simply concerned about our daughter, he muttered, the words a weak, pathetic attempt to douse the flames. Kesha's fingers tapped, once, twice, against the smooth, hard surface of the recorder in her pocket. This was not just another incident of casual discrimination. This was a public performance, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the true, ugly heart of the elite, a demonstration of how they truly thought, how they truly felt, when their sense of superiority was challenged. What Victoria, in her towering rage, could not possibly know was that Kesha had been forged in a world where every word was a potential weapon, every gesture a calculated risk. The daughter of a single mother who had worked 3 grueling low-wage jobs to keep them afloat, she had learned, from a very young age, that the world was not a kind or forgiving place for a deaf, black girl from a rough neighborhood in Brooklyn. While other teenagers were at parties, she was in the cavernous, silent halls of the public library, devouring books on advanced lip reading, on kinesics, on the subtle, unspoken art of body language. By the age of 16, she had mastered 4 different sign languages, and had developed an almost preternatural ability to read the intricate, fleeting micro-expressions that betrayed a person's true thoughts and feelings. Kesha, Michael, the manager, began, his voice a nervous, placating murmur. Perhaps you should. No. Emma's voice, a little louder this time, a little stronger, cut him off. She stepped out from behind her father's chair, her small chin held high. She didn't do anything wrong. She just helped me. Victoria froze. Thomas's eyes widened. This was the second time in 2 years that their daughter had spoken, and this time, she was speaking in defense of a stranger. Emma, sweetheart. Victoria tried, her voice a sudden, jarring shift into a syrupy, condescending sweetness. She crouched down, bringing herself to her daughter's level. Mummy is just worried about you. These people, they don't understand how to take care of a special little girl like you. Kesha watched the interaction with a cool, clinical detachment. It was a classic manipulation tactic, a pattern she had seen and documented dozens of times. The powerful, justifying their prejudice by framing it as an act of protection, of concern. I'm not special, Emma replied, her small voice carrying a surprising weight of authority. I just didn't want to talk anymore because people yell a lot. The profound, devastating irony of the statement hung in the air. Victoria Ashford had spent the last 10 minutes yelling, screaming, creating a scene in a crowded cafe. She was the living, breathing embodiment of the very behavior that had driven her own daughter into a shell of silence. Thomas finally seemed to find a sliver of his long dormant spine. He stood, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. Victoria, that's enough. We'll discuss this at home. No, she rose, a tower of righteous indignation. I will not leave this establishment until this situation has been properly resolved. I demand to speak to the owner, now." It was then that Kesha finally spoke, her voice clear, calm, and perfectly modulated. The ease with which she articulated her words, despite her deafness, seemed to irritate Victoria even more, as if her competence was a personal affront to Victoria's preconceived notions. "Mr. Richardson will be here at 3 o'clock, ma'am. I would be happy to schedule a meeting for you. Do you have some kind of certification to deal with children with special needs?" Victoria fired back, her eyes narrowed, searching for a weakness, a chink in Kesha's armor. "Any medical training whatsoever. Who gave you permission to approach my daughter in the first place?" "Mummy, stop," Emma pleaded, her small, fragile voice now laced with a surprising firmness. "You're being mean." The cafe was now completely, utterly silent. The low hum of the espresso machine had ceased. The barista stood, frozen, watching the drama unfold. A dozen smartphone cameras were now openly recording, and Kesha knew, with a calm certainty, that within hours this scene would be a viral sensation. But there was something that Victoria, in her blind, self-righteous fury, could not possibly see. Every poisonous word she uttered, every sneer, every display of blatant, unapologetic prejudice, was being carefully, meticulously, and strategically documented, and Kesha wasn't just collecting evidence from this one spectacular incident. She was building a case that was years in the making. In her 5 years at Café Belle Vista, she had witnessed, and discreetly recorded, dozens of conversations in which the titans of industry, the political power brokers, the philanthropic grand dames of Manhattan society, had revealed their true, ugly selves. Conversations in which they had openly, and often jokingly, discussed how to keep certain kinds of people out of their exclusive social circles, out of their prestigious boardrooms, out of their pristine, well-ordered world. What these privileged, powerful people, in their arrogance, had never considered was that the deaf waitress, the one they saw as a piece of furniture, as an invisible, harmless presence, was listening, and she was remembering, and she was recording. Kesha looked at Emma, who was now timidly holding her father's hand, and she saw not just a traumatized child, but a potential ally, a key to unlocking a door that had been locked for far too long. "You can rest assured, ma'am," Kesha said, her voice a model of professional deference, as she adjusted her apron, preparing to return to her duties. "Everything will be handled appropriately." Victoria, mistaking her calm for surrender, let out a small, triumphant sniff. Thomas, his face a mask of weary relief, thought the ordeal was finally over, but Emma, his daughter, looked at Kesha, and her eyes, for a fleeting, secret moment, sparkled with a wisdom and an understanding that was far beyond her years. And in that moment, a silent pact was forged, a partnership that would shake the very foundations of their privileged, complacent world. In the 2 weeks that followed the explosive incident at Café Belle Vista, a fragile, deceptive sense of normalcy returned. Victoria Ashford, a woman for whom public perception was everything, resumed her customary Tuesday and Thursday lunches, her demeanor as cool and imperious as if nothing had ever happened. Thomas continued to hold his discreet high-stakes business meetings at his usual corner table, and Emma was a different child. She now arrived at the cafe clutching a small leather-bound notebook, in which she diligently practiced the signs Kesha had taught her. She smiled openly. She asked questions, her small, once silent voice growing stronger, more confident, with each passing day. Her transformation was so stark, so miraculous, that the other regular patrons of the cafe began to whisper about the miraculous recovery of the Ashford daughter. Kesha watched it all, her expression unreadable, her mind a cool, clinical instrument of observation and analysis. She served their expensive coffees, she cleared their tables, she polished their silverware. But during her breaks, while the other employees congregated in the cramped back room, scrolling through their phones and complaining about their tips, Kesha would slip away. Down in the dusty, cavernous basement of the cafe, in a small windowless storage room that had long been abandoned, she had created a secret world, a meticulously organized and utterly damning archive of the hidden life of Manhattan's elite. An entire wall was covered in neatly labeled file folders. Each folder contained a collection of digital recordings, photographs, and painstakingly transcribed conversations, evidence she had been systematically gathering for the past 5 years. Not just from Café Belle Vista, but from the dozens of charity galas, city council meetings, and exclusive social gatherings where she had worked as a temporary waitress, a ghost in the machine of high society. On a central folder, in small, neat letters, were the words, Project Awakening. Inside were the detailed profiles of 43 of the most influential people in New York City, a list that included both Victoria and Thomas Ashford. Each profile was a testament to Kesha's patience and her purpose. Each one documented a pattern of discriminatory behavior, of prejudiced comments, of exclusionary practices disguised as company policy or legitimate concerns. Victoria had no idea that her phone conversation from the previous week, in which she had instructed the headmistress of Emma's exclusive private school to keep a close watch for any inappropriate influences her daughter might be receiving, had been perfectly and completely recorded. Kesha, with her advanced lip-reading skills, could hear a phone conversation from across a crowded room, simply by watching one side of the call. We need to ensure that Emma understands the difference between a temporary charitable impulse and the kind of relationships that are appropriate for her social class, Victoria had said, her voice a low, conspiratorial mood. Unaware that every single one of her poisonous words was being documented, it was during one of these clandestine documentation sessions that Kesha received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Marcus Williams, one of the city's most prominent and feared civil rights attorneys, descended the narrow, creaking stairs of the storage room, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. Impressive, he said, his eyes scanning the wall of evidence. Very impressive. In my 20 years of practicing law, I have never seen such a systematic and comprehensive documentation of institutional discrimination. Dr. Williams was no stranger to Kesha. They had met 3 years earlier, when she had been the key witness in a class-action lawsuit against a restaurant chain that had been systematically discriminating against its deaf customers. He had been impressed then, not only by her courage, but by her almost obsessive attention to detail, her ability to meticulously document every instance of the discrimination she had experienced. The Ashford case, he continued, his voice a low, excited hum as he leafed through the latest additions to her file. This could be our golden opportunity. Kesha Victoria made the fatal mistake of verbalizing her discriminatory views in a public space, in front of dozens of witnesses, and, most importantly, in the presence of her own daughter. From a legal standpoint, that changes everything. Kesha showed him the detailed strategic plan she had been developing for the past year. This was not just about exposing the individual prejudices of the Ashford family. This was about something much bigger, a landmark lawsuit, one that would set a new and powerful precedent for combating the subtle, insidious forms of discrimination based on ability and race that were endemic to the city's most elite institutions. The current disability rights legislation has significant loopholes when it comes to this kind of subtle, soft discrimination, Dr. Williams explained, his eyes gleaming with a lawyer's righteous zeal. But if we can prove a systematic and pervasive pattern of exclusionary behavior, we can not only win substantial damages, but we can force real, structural changes in how these kinds of exclusive spaces operate. The plan was audacious. By using Emma as the central exhibit, a living, breathing example of a child who had been demonstrably, miraculously helped by the very form of communication her mother had so viciously denigrated, they could prove that Victoria's objections were based not on genuine maternal concern, but on a deep-seated and legally actionable prejudice. Emma is our key, Kesha said, showing him the discreetly recorded videos of the little girl's joyful and increasingly confident interactions at the cafe. She blossomed, she thrived, she found her voice, when she was exposed to a form of communication that was different from the norm, and her mother tried to deny her that, based solely on her own personal prejudices. But there was more. In her deep obsessive research on the Ashford family, Kesha had discovered a piece of information that was pure, legal dynamite. Thomas Ashford, the man who had stood by and silently condoned his wife's discriminatory tirade, was a senior advisor to a prominent children's foundation, a foundation that received millions of dollars in annual federal funding for its inclusion programs. The irony was almost too perfect. If we can prove that he was not only aware of his wife's discriminatory behavior, but that he did nothing to correct it, we can call into question the entire integrity of his foundation, Dr. Williams explained, his voice thick with excitement. That could trigger a federal investigation. A potential loss of funding, the reputational damage would be catastrophic. As they were plotting the final, intricate details of their legal strategy, a small figure appeared in the doorway of the storage room. It was Emma. Kesha quickly covered some of the more sensitive documents, but the little girl wasn't interested in the scattered papers. She had come downstairs for a reason. She needed help with a specific word. How do I say justice in sign language? She asked, her eyes bright with a pure, unadulterated curiosity. Kesha smiled and showed her the sign, two fisted hands, one held above the other, then separated horizontally in a single, decisive movement. Emma practiced it several times, her small hands mimicking the motion until she had it perfect. Why did you want to know that word, sweetie? Kesha asked. Because Mummy said you shouldn't work here anymore, Emma replied, with the devastating, simple logic of a child. And that's not fair. You helped me when no one else could. Dr. Williams watched the interaction in silence, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. He realized, in that moment, that they had more than just legal evidence. They had a witness whose very recovery, whose very voice, was a living, breathing refutation of her mother's entire discriminatory worldview. That night, after the Ashfords had gone home, Kesha finalized the last details of her strategy. She had spent 5 years gathering the evidence, 3 years planning the legal approach, and 2 weeks refining the timing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Victoria was scheduled to return the following Thursday for the monthly meeting of the prestigious charity committee she chaired, a meeting that, by a stroke of beautiful, karmic serendipity, always took place in the private dining room of Café Belle Vista. It would be there, surrounded by her social equals, in the heart of her own perceived territory, that Kesha would execute the first phase of her plan. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this particular charity committee had recently received a proposal for a new partnership, a partnership with a prominent disability rights organization, a proposal that was to be presented, in person, by someone Victoria Ashford had already, and very publicly, tried to humiliate. Kesha looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror in the storage room bathroom, adjusting the collar of the simple, professional blazer she had bought especially for the occasion. For the past 2 weeks, Victoria had been behaving as if she had won, as if she had successfully defended her daughter from the inappropriate influences of the outside world. She had no idea that she had just, with her own words, with her own actions, provided the final, crucial pieces of ammunition for a war that she had already, and spectacularly, lost. The meeting of the Manhattan Elite Charity Committee was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Thursday in the private, sun-drenched room on the second floor of Café Belle Vista. The ladies of high society began to arrive, a flock of brightly colored, impeccably coiffed birds of paradise, their chatter and laughter filling the air. Victoria Ashford, the queen bee, entered last, beaming, greeting her friends with a flurry of air kisses and self-congratulatory remarks about the truly deserving causes they were about to fund. She had no idea that the agenda for today's meeting included a special presentation on the subject of inclusion and accessibility. Before we begin, ladies, Victoria announced, adjusting her designer glasses and assuming her most regal, authoritative posture, I feel it is my duty to share a recent, and rather distressing, personal experience. An experience that highlights, I believe, the importance of being highly selective in our charitable donations. Recently, in this very establishment, a disabled employee attempted to manipulate my own dear daughter, using a series of rather questionable and unprofessional methods. A murmur of sympathetic outrage rippled through the room. The other women nodded their heads, their expressions a mixture of concern and solidarity. It was at that precise moment that the door to the room opened, and Dr. Williams entered, his expression grim and professional. He was followed by Kesha, who was no longer in her simple waitress apron, but in the sleek, professional blazer she had bought for the occasion. Allow me to introduce our special guest presenter, Dr. Williams said, his voice calm, but with an underlying edge of steel. This is Miss Kesha Johnson, the founder of the Awakening Project, and a leading expert in the field of institutional discrimination documentation. Victoria froze, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining from her face. Her friends looked, from her to Kesha, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. The silence in the room was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. Thank you for inviting me, Kesha said, her voice clear and strong as she connected her laptop to the room's projector. I'd like to begin by sharing some interesting data I have collected regarding the patterns of discrimination in establishments frequented by Manhattan's elite. The first image that flashed onto the screen was a still frame from a cell phone video. It showed Victoria, her face contorted in a mask of rage, screaming across the table in the cafe 2 weeks earlier. The caption underneath read, "Discriminatory behavior documented on video, October 25th. The audio began to play. Victoria's own voice, crystal clear and devastatingly ugly, filling the silent room. That person is manipulating my daughter with cheap tricks. How dare you hire someone like that to serve decent people? Victoria tried to stand, to protest, but her legs seemed to have lost their strength. That was taken out of context. An interesting context, Kesha replied, her voice cool, dispassionate. Moving on to the next slide. She clicked a button, and a new image appeared, a transcript of a recorded phone call. Here we have the recording of a conversation from last Tuesday, in which you, Mrs. Ashford, instructed the headmistress of your daughter's school to be on the lookout for inappropriate influences. Victoria's voice once again echoed through the room. We need to make sure Emma understands the difference between a temporary, charitable impulse and the kind of relationships that are appropriate for her social class. The expressions on the faces of the other women had now shifted from confusion to a cold, and very public, disapproval. Margaret Thornton, one of the committee's founding members and a woman of impeccable social standing, frowned, her displeasure evident. And here, Kesha continued, her voice relentless. We have the evidence that Mr. Thomas Ashford, a senior advisor to the Hope for Children Foundation, a foundation that receives over $2 million in annual federal funding for its inclusion programs, was present during these discriminatory incidents, and took no corrective action whatsoever. Victoria finally found her voice. You can't. That's illegal. You are not authorized to record me. Actually, Dr. Williams stood, his voice ringing with a lawyer's unshakable authority. All of these recordings were made in public, or semi-public spaces, where there is no legal expectation of privacy. Furthermore, he paused for dramatic effect. We have a very special witness who has agreed to share her perspective. With the committee, the door to the room opened, and Emma walked in. She was followed by her father, Thomas, who looked as if he had aged 10 years in the last 2 weeks. Emma would like to give a brief presentation, Dr. Williams announced, in American Sign Language, which I will translate for you. The 8-year-old girl walks to the front of the room, her small face a mask of solemn determination. She took a deep breath and began to sign, her small hands moving with a fluid, confident grace. My name is Emma. Her small, clear voice accompanied her gestures. For a long time I did not speak, because I was afraid, because people yelled. Kesha taught me that I can talk with my hands, when the words are too hard to say. My mother said that people like Kesha should not work here. My mother is wrong. Victoria was visibly and publicly devastated. Emma, honey, you don't understand. I understand that you were wrong, Mummy, Emma continued, her signs now stronger, more confident. Kesha helped me when no one else could. She is my teacher, and she is my friend. Margaret Thornton rose slowly to her feet. Victoria, she said, her voice a low, damning verdict. I believe it is time for you to step down as the chair of this committee. Immediately, Margaret, you can't, Victoria began, but she was cut off. I can, and I will, Margaret replied, her voice as cold as ice. This committee is supposed to represent the values of charity, and compassion, and inclusion. Your recent behavior, Victoria, is a violation of everything we stand for. Dr. Williams then presented the final, devastating document. We have here a petition, signed by 43 members of this community, formally requesting a federal investigation into the discriminatory practices of any and all establishments that receive tax benefits for their supposed promotion of diversity. Victoria looked around the room, at the faces that had once admired and envied her. All she saw now was a sea of disapproval, of embarrassment, of a cold, and very public, social shunning. Her reputation, the thing she had so carefully, so ruthlessly, built over decades, was crumbling to dust before her very eyes. In addition, Dr. Williams continued, his voice relentless, Café Bella Vista has agreed to implement a comprehensive sensitivity training program for all of its employees, and to hire a full-time sign language interpreter. Miss Johnson has graciously agreed to personally oversee this transition. Thomas finally spoke, his voice a raw, broken whisper. Victoria, we need to go home now. As the Ashford family made their humiliating exit, Kesha remained calm and professional. She had not acted out of malice. She had not acted out of a desire for revenge. She had acted out of a profound and unshakable sense of justice. Margaret Thornton approached her after the Ashfords had left. Miss Johnson, she said, her voice filled with a new, and very real, respect. I would like to formally invite you to serve as this committee's new inclusion consultant, with a salary that will properly, and finally, reflect your considerable experience, and your profound importance. Emma, before she left, ran to Kesha and wrapped her small arms around her in a fierce, tight hug. She signed, over and over, the sign for thank you, and in that moment, as she watched the little girl smile, a fearless, joyful, and finally, uninhibited smile, Kesha knew that she had not just won a battle, she had planted the seeds for a quiet and beautiful revolution. 6 months later, Café Bella Vista was a different place. The hushed, exclusive atmosphere had been replaced by a vibrant, welcoming hum. It had become a national benchmark for inclusion, a place where the city's elite now mingled with a diverse and eclectic clientele who valued authenticity and respect over social status. Kesha Johnson, in her new role as the Director of Inclusion and Diversity, had transformed not just the cafe but the conversation around it. Emma Ashford, now 9, was not only fluent in sign language, but had become a passionate and articulate advocate for it, teaching classes to other children on the weekends. Her joy, her confidence, her natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life, had made her a small but powerful ambassador for the cause of inclusion. Kesha didn't just change my daughter's life, Thomas Ashford confided. During an interview for a television program on stories of personal transformation, she changed all of our lives. She taught us that my daughter's silence wasn't a disability. It was a language. We just had to learn how to listen. Thomas himself had become a vocal and passionate advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. His foundation, once a vehicle for performative, reputation-burnishing charity, now allocated the majority of its resources to real, on-the-ground inclusion programs. Victoria, on the other hand, was living in a different reality. Stripped of her chairmanships, her board memberships, her social standing, she had become a pariah in the world she had once so effortlessly commanded. Her reputation, destroyed not by a scandal, but by her own words, her own prejudices, followed her like a persistent, unshakable shadow. "It's amazing how the world has changed," she murmured to an old friend, one of the few who would still take her calls. "People used to understand that certain social positions came with certain responsibilities. A responsibility to uphold standards." Her friend had just shaken her head. "Victoria, you publicly humiliated a person because of her disability, and you did it in front of your own daughter. There is no context in which that is acceptable." Emma, meanwhile, thrived. Her new school had embraced her, and the inclusion programs she had inspired had become a part of the regular curriculum. She often invited her deaf classmates to the cafe, creating a natural, joyful bridge between communities that had once lived in separate, silent worlds. Kesha's story, her quiet, determined fight for justice, had inspired hundreds of others to confront the subtle, insidious forms of bias in their own workplaces and social circles. "The sweetest revenge," she had said, during a lecture at Columbia University, "is not to destroy those who have hurt you. It is to build something so beautiful, so powerful, so inclusive, that their small, narrow-minded opinion of you becomes completely and utterly irrelevant." One Sunday afternoon, Emma was at the cafe, practicing sign language with a group of other children, when she approached Kesha with a question. Her expression serious, her eyes wide with a child's profound, and often surprising, wisdom. "Kesha," she asked, "do you think my mum can still learn to be better?" Kesha knelt, considering her answer carefully. "People can always change, Emma, if they really want to. But real change, true change, has to come from within, from the heart." And in that moment, as she watched Emma sign "I love you" to each of the children in her group before they left, Kesha realized that she had planted seeds that would grow into something far greater than a simple legal victory. She had helped to raise a generation that would value differences, not as obstacles, but as opportunities. A generation that would understand that true inclusion doesn't diminish anyone, it elevates everyone.